Good evening, everyone. If you could take your seats, we're going to get started. My name is Shiri Pasternak. I'm one of the organizers of tonight's event, and I'd like to begin by thanking everyone for joining in person and online, and thanking our travelers who came pretty far distances to be with us here for this event. This event marks the public component of the organizing undertaken by the National RCMP Research Council, a network of community leaders, researchers, activists who have traveled here from across the country to share our experience, expertise, and critiques of our national police force. Before we begin, I want to welcome to the stage Grandmother Loretta to open our event in a good way.
I want to thank everybody offering me this tobacco, for asking me to open this in a good way for all of you. My name's Loretta Watage. I'm originally from Pipe Pot, Saskatchewan. I've lived in Toronto 40 years. I've done this work now going on quite a while. I'm a grandmother, great-grandma, knowledge keeper, and I'm out just helping our people in this area. So I'm going to open up with the prayer. I usually have smudge, but we couldn't have smudge everybody. My scope, Miss Girl goes in lodge thunderclan. I give thanks for this day. I give thanks for this meeting that's going, help everybody to understand what they're here for and whatnot. Thanks for that, and being able to help any way I can. Just saying this prayer to everybody to be there with them. Oh, gotch. See, I told you.
I want to begin by opening up the evening with a few short remarks that link the longer arc of RCMP violence that we'll be discussing tonight with this moment of Palestinian genocide that we're in. To put it plainly, there's a coordinated effort, a conspiracy to criminalize Palestine solidarity in Canada. To criminalize the current movement for Palestinian liberation in Canada, the RCMP at this moment are bringing together their manuals and best practices from both the so-called War on Terror security frameworks, alongside their century and a half of training and attacking Indigenous assertions of territorial jurisdiction and authority, and in particular, their more recent experience with blockades and occupations. They are also being lobbied hard by pro-Israel groups to expand the legal definition of hate crimes to include criticism of Israel of various kinds. With my colleague, Dr. Tia Daphnos, we have spent the last 6 months studying coordination between the RCMP, universities, local police of jurisdiction, lobby groups, and government officials in public safety offices across all levels of government. For context, the current era of RCMP policing begins after 9/11 in 2001, when the declaration of the War on Terror in the United States triggered Canada to shift the focus of policing onto what are called anticipatory logics of risk modeling, scenario planning and training, and the so-called intelligence-led policing that led to the extraordinary rendition of racially profiled men like Monia's husband, Mayor Arar, in 2002. This same logic of intelligence-led policing was then redeployed to profile Indigenous people in preparation for a 2007 National Indigenous Day of Action, culminating in the creation of a threat assessment center and new regimes of integrated policing between public and private security forces. Over the years, new security architecture was devised by the RCMP to monitor, survey, and profile Indigenous community leaders as they were folded into domestic terrorism frameworks of policing concurrently developed to target so-called extremism. The War on Terroir and the War on Terror have converged in the past 18 months in Canadian policing. The apotheosis of this convergence is the redeployment of CURG/CREW to police the Palestine Solidarity Movement. This paramilitary unit of the RCMP was formed in 2016 specifically to police Indigenous resistance to pipelines in BC. It was called the Community Industry Response Group, and it accumulated literally hundreds of complaints of human rights violations in record time, including several lawsuits and the launch of a systemic review. The CURG rebranded as CREW, the Community Response Unit, and the Tyee has reported that they have been, in their own words, deployed to pro-Hamas demonstrations to support the police of jurisdiction with public safety and enforcement at these politically and emotionally charged events, end quote. This is a Palestine Solidarity March that they are reporting. We have found extensive RCMP monitoring operations across the country and a concurrent push for the expansion of RCMP powers through new legislation attempting to change the definition of hate crimes. We found, for example, J Division has lists compiled by the Open Source Unit and the Special Project Unit of all Palestine Solidarity gatherings throughout the New Brunswick region. E Division and BC convened or participated in a monitoring group that likewise included any Palestine Solidarity events in their surveillance target, including by members of CREW. The National Protective Threat Assessment Unit was activated after October 7th to, quote, assess the ongoing situation as it pertains to the threat level for Israeli interests in Canada, despite also reporting that, quote, UN Relief Work Agency states the Israeli siege on Gaza could make a bad situation in Gaza far worse. Israel has now cut off food, fuel, water, and electricity to the region. The objective of the RCMP, formed in 1873 to police Dakota, Saulteaux, Assiniboine, Métis, Cree, and Blackfoot resistance on the prairies into domestic settler law, was refined through decades of conflict with the Kanesatake Mohawks in 1991 at Oka, or the Secwepemc warriors at Sepetin in 1995, where 77,000 rounds of RCMP ammunition were fired at land defenders, and so on. This asymmetrical warfare forms part of an older apparatus of imperial and colonial logics, at which Canada sits neatly at the center as a settler colonial state governed by self-proclaimed Zionists. This is why the work we continue to do must be done together. I'd like now to invite to the stage our panelists for tonight's event. And I'd like to introduce them as well as you come up to the stage. Our host for this evening is Brandi Morin, an acclaimed Cree Iroquois French journalist from Treaty 6 territory in Alberta, Canada, who has spent nearly 15 years amplifying Indigenous voices through her work with major outlets around the world, such as National Geographic, Jazeera English, Rolling Stone, and New York Times. Her exceptional journalism has earned numerous prestigious awards, including the 2019 Human Rights Reporting Award from the Canadian Association of Journalists and a 2022 Edward Murrow Award for her series on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Denise Namox is a Wet'suwet'en hereditary chief who has spoken at the United Nations headquarters in New York City and Geneva to deliver a message from his people about the role the RCMP are playing on his land in the context of resource development. He's traveled throughout the world with this message. Monia Mazigh is an academic and author of 3 novels and a memoir. She was catapulted onto the public stage in 2002 when her husband, Mayor Arar, was deported to Syria and held without charges for over a year. Her memoir, Hope and Despair, documents the ordeal, and all her novels have won multiple awards. She was born in Tunisia, earned a PhD in finance from McGill, and is an adjunct professor currently at Carleton University in Ottawa. Al Jones has been at the forefront of producing cutting-edge research and policy analysis on the RCMP in Nova Scotia. She co-led and authored the groundbreaking report, Defunding the Police, Defining the Way Forward for HRM, which recommended major reforms for the dual RCMP-HRM policing system in Halifax, and she was also an expert for the mass casualty event on Portapique. Double-sided pages. She has also been involved in general advocacy for years through community organizations in support of families impacted by RCMP violence and criminalization. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Pansy, hello. Taniki, Shiri for the introduction. Thank you everybody for welcoming us all to the stage. It's an honor to be here. I'm actually fresh from the Amazon. My flight got here and I had 15 minutes to get a shower and head on over. So I'm very, very happy to be here. And to TMU for providing the opportunity to discuss the RCMP and the injustices that are happening across the range of communities, histories, and struggles impacted by the Regional Police Force of Canada. Also in reflection by Shiri's opening remarks on the links today between the RCMP and the policing of Palestine solidarity, I want to state my opposition to Israel's genocide in Gaza and the ongoing occupation of Palestinian lands. I've spent my career as a journalist sitting at tables with families of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people of this land, of covering our people who are continuously targeted and murdered by the police forces in this country, and showing up on the front lines of Indigenous struggles from coast to coast, across North America, and now into South America. The question of colonialism is something that I have lived with every day of my life, professionally and personally. And it's the violence of colonization that links us all and that links Palestine to Canada. With that said, I would like to begin by posing a question to Wet'suwet'en Hereditary Chief Namux. It's so good to see you. So the history of the RCMP reaches back to the furthest histories of colonization in this country. Can you help us to draw the links and parallels between the longer lines of violence from early settlement to the more recent invasions of your territory, Wet'suwet'en lands, to build a pipeline?
Denise, Sakaze, I'm going to start off with telling you we're one of the last, if not the last, Indigenous nation in Canada to have European contact. It's less than 150 years for us. That is why our culture is so strong. So when the Northwest Mounted Police were created, which are now the RCMP, their mandate was to kill the Indian. If you think about residential school, kill the Indian and the child, they were simply there. That's all it was. When I think about the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the way that they've treated our people, now all people in Canada, for simply standing up for clean air, clean water, and human rights. And we're criminalized, we're called extremists, they put labels on us so that they could arrest us. You know, every time we go outside, I gotta look down the barrel of a gun. There are snipers on the buildings. We go to the banks, the AGMs, you look up on top, you were there with us. You're staring down the barrel of a gun with snipers. And this is supposed to be a democratic country that is run by the people, not by an industry and not by a police force, which I believe is rogue at this point in time. And if they are not listening to the people in a democratic country, you've taken a step in not only trying to understand who's steering it, which at this time for us is petrol companies, so you become a petro state. And guess what? You're run by a police state. And in a democratic country, that's not supposed to happen. As a son of a Second World War veteran, I have to really think on a daily basis about how did we get to this point? And it all goes back to patterns from first contact on. What did they use? And those cycles of patterns continue. All they do is use separate words. They change the words, but their goal is the same. If we're there to protect clean air, clean water, human rights, and we're an impediment to them, their answer is simply to remove you. And I don't think that Canada nor the world understands the amount of violence that is happening within this country, and the very fact that Canada's reputation of this highly regarded country in the world. When I speak at the United Nations, I remind them what is happening in Canada, because they're not telling the true story. When we tell our truth, we're talking from experience. When we tell our truth, we challenge why in a democratic country that is so highly regarded, one of the founders of the United Nations can get away with what they get away with. You have to put it in the perspective of who's steering it. Is money? Why is money steering a country that is supposed to be here for the people? Our law as Indigenous people is land, air, water, culture, humans. Theirs is the opposite. It's the dollar. And we currently live in a time right now where the dollar is worth more than any human life. I'm sorry, but that orange fella, Ronald McDonald T. Rump, should not be steering the world. It should be the people. And I think that what they're trying to do is intimidate people, and I mean all people, not just Indigenous people, to fall in line with what they want you to do. And what you need to do is stand together, use your voice, and tell them that you count, you matter, and that your voice matters, and what you're doing is right. And they hate that. It's very rarely that I travel without security because of what, and this isn't about me. This is about the law of the land. I really don't care if they hurt me. There's already another Chief Namox ready. He's been prepared for years. But if we don't raise our voices and stand together, it's not going to get any better. The only ones that can make change is you, not them, no matter what they say, because they are wrong.
Hi, Chief. You know, it's always been about the resources, like you were saying, and they put different words, right? They put different words behind it these days. I want to move on to Monia. So do you see parallels between the history of colonization and the so-called War on Terror? What's been your own formative experience of the RCMP in your life and to your community?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be on this panel. Thank you for Professor Shiri for her invitation. And for bringing this very important topic, because one of the symbol of Canada is the RCMP, is those, the picture the kids will take with those Mounties. And it seems like this is something that we are proud of, whereas it is an institution that, as Chief was talking and telling us about, has a history of violence towards the First Nation, towards many communities, towards a lot of marginalized communities. And I think, I mean, I don't want to go into full details of what happened to the Muslim and Arab community after 9/11, but I think this is how the RCMP came also to be known as the architect of the racial profile, the surveillance, the extraordinary rendition that my husband has been a victim of, and many other actually cases. I wanted to mention, if I have some time to, absolutely, I think they are the architect of discrimination, of the institutionalized sort of, because we came to the point to believe that this is normal sort of discrimination. So the country can be functional, so the economy can turn as if we cannot do otherwise. And the protector of this institutions are the RCMP. In the case of the Muslim and Arab communities, I think many of them were somehow, and I don't pretend to speak on behalf of all the Muslim communities, but many of them were under this sort of impression that the RCMP is not there for them, is not going to go after them. Whether consciously or unconsciously, whether by knowledge or maybe by ignorance as well. So they believed into this dream of Canada, this dream of immigration, this dream of careers. And all of a sudden, I think there is always a good side, you know, the dark side of the moon and the bright side of it. And I think the dark side of 9/11 was that it started by arresting people not any people, but people who would be with a certain profile from the Muslim community, surveillance. And this work, I mean, I know that today we have the emphasis in the RCMP, but there is also another element in the room, which is CSIS as well. So they do, I mean, they used to be the same sort of entity, and then they split after the McDonald kind of inquiry with what happened in Quebec. But I think it's sometimes they would play some sort of the bad cop and the good cop. So sometimes if we don't know what's happened, or if we then it's going to be attributed to the CSIS, and then if things will be good, then the RCMP was kind of stand up and show that picture. So I thought about the dark side and the bright side, and I think the dark side was those arrests, those systemic discrimination, those extraordinary rendition, like what happened to Meher Arar. But also the bright side is, I think this image came to also be shattered, this image of the RCMP. And a lot of people start to understand that they are not really there for the nice picture and for, you know, all these souvenirs, but they are there also to protect what they call the national security. And this national security, I think what happened after 9/11, the politician, they were very good at selling this to a lot of Canadian. I think the majority of Canadian is to tell them, look, in order to be safe in this country, you need to let go some of your rights. But they didn't know that this sort of a deal was done on the back of the Muslim and Arab communities, with their arrest, with their deportation. In the case of my husband, and I will speak very briefly, I remember very, very well that, so I'll give you like a little bit here of an example. I remember very well when my husband was literally, like it was like a kidnapping, when he was, I didn't know where he was. And I was speaking later on with a lawyer, and I said to him, so what are we going to do? And he said, look, it's very simple and easy. I have done this before. It's going to work. I'll call the RCMP, you know, some levels, and then I will get a letter from them to say that Meher Arar is not linked to any terrorist activities. And he thought that he will be able to get that letter. And all they gave him was like no criminal record. They wouldn't say, they wouldn't be able, or they wouldn't be willing actually to give that letter. And the fact that they denied that letter, it took my husband 13 months to be tortured in Syria, to be jailed. And when the RCMP, what do they call, the commissioner, when the commissioner later on in 2007 called me, because it was part of the agreement, is to say, like, he would apologize. And I told him, I'm not sure if I will forgive you, but remember that letter? Why you didn't give that letter? And he didn't say anything. So I think if there is a pattern, to start with your question, is that there is a pattern of mistake. There is a pattern of repeating the same mistakes with the Aboriginal communities, our Indigenous First Nation people, with the many marginalized other communities. And of course, after 9/11, there are many examples. What happened to my husband is one of them, but many other examples that show that they continue to do this impunity over and over to keep the power in place and to keep those institutions in a way safe. But I think basically not really, because that leads to some sort of less and less faith in those institutions.
Hi, Monia. So, Elle, you have somewhat of a unique perspective of dealing with the RCMP as an urban police force, as well as a provincial force in Nova Scotia. How would you tie the histories of the RCMP in the province to its role on the streets of Halifax, for example?
That's an interesting question. Is this on? Okay. So Halifax is unique in that we're co-policed by the Halifax Regional Police and the RCMP. So the RCMP tends to do like the outskirts, and then HRP is in the city center. And this is relevant because the historic Black community is also on the outskirts of the city. So the way that African Nova Scotians are settled is in like 56 communities across the province. It's essentially like close enough to be able to come in and be your maid or construction worker, but not close enough that you had to live beside Black people. That was kind of like the logic. So this is, so for example, with racial profiling, you know, the RCMP repeatedly will profile people going into and out of North Preston, which only has one road. You can only really get through North Preston. There's a back road, but you don't really take it. And so it's very easy for them to harass drivers like leaving their home and going through Dartmouth, for example. The community center in North Preston, the RCMP community office is in the community center. So when you go, it's like the kids are playing basketball, there's the after school stuff, and the RCMP office is right there, which for a long time, nobody seemed to have a problem with. It was like an interesting, because it was sold to the community as like, this is good, this is how you mingle with the police. But of course, is a form of surveillance as well. So obviously, Nova Scotia has the oldest history of Black settlement in North America, actually, and certainly in Canada. So there's 400 years of settlement of Black people. And that, of course, includes interactions and relationships with Black people and the Mi'kmaq people. So, for example, many Mi'kmaq people talk about hiding their children within the Black community to save them from residential schools. So trying to present kids as Black so that they wouldn't be taken to residential schools. So this kind of history, and then also a history of enslaved Africans who existed in the province being aided by Mi'kmaq people. So there's a lot of co-relationship between the two communities that way. And so, of course, in a province that has like very early Black settlement, that has a long history of enslavement, was the site of the first race riots recorded in North America, which was in Shelburne. So this is where the white people rioted for 10 days because David George was preaching to white people, but this is the settled loyalists, so enslaved Black people that are free and white loyalists that are living in the same community, essentially, and then the white people burn out the Black people. So, you know, these ongoing histories of white supremacy in the province, and many people will call Nova Scotia the Mississippi of the North. Or the deep south of Canada, because of this long history of anti-Black racism that people often think exclusively belongs to the States and is imported here. But of course, like I said, we have the oldest recorded race, right? Like white supremacy is rooted in Nova Scotia, particularly against Black communities. And so that is relevant to the development of policing. Our public gardens, the gate to the public gardens has a plaque in honor of the Northwest Battalion that, of course, was going out to suppress Louis Riel's rebellion. So this is our downtown Halifax. And when you go into the public gardens, it's like gardens and monuments to the RCMP and the Boer War, which is actually what a public garden is, because it was a symbolic Victorian era symbol of taming the colonies, right? So you would bring in plants from around the world and show that you can, just as you can tame wildlife and put it into order, you can put those peoples into order. So plaques in the public garden also include a monument to a guy who killed like 1,000 Nigerian people. An RCMP guy who like went up north and refused to listen to the Inuit people, and so like got caught in a blizzard and died. A monument to soldiers of the Boer War, and like a monument to people massacring the Riel like rebellion. So that tells you, I guess, everything about how embedded policing, colonialism, anti-Blackness, anti-indigeneity, and like genocide of Indigenous people are, and then embedded into the like architecture of Halifax, which also, of course, has a cannon that fires at noon off Citadel Hill, which is where the British like military fort was. So this is like the context with which we deal with RCMP policing. I'll stop there, but hopefully that's helpful. So the other thing that's really funny, first of all, I will say, is that the HRP and RCMP do not get along. So when we wrote the defunding report, because it was largely directed at HRP, the RCMP pretended to like it and adopt it, basically like in order to like fuck with HRP. So they were like, oh, we love this report. And so like they met with us, like their union met with us and claimed to like support, not like support defunding, but like agree with the ideologies and goals behind it, as in like we need to divest from like police doing certain things. They pretended to agree with that. And this is of course the extremely aggressive RCMP police union that literally opposes any mention of systemic racism, but pretended to speak to us. So, I mean, it's like a very, like the politics of policing are in themselves like very bizarre, because the RCMP is not actually subject to the police board. So they sort of swan in because knowing that the police board can't say anything binding to them, and they basically show up to fuck with the HRP, who can theoretically be like governed by the police board, but isn't, because our police board doesn't do anything. But I'll stop there. But
Yeah, also I just have a follow-up question. So like we know the history, and we know the context, we know the, you know, the deep influence and infiltration that, you know, these forces have in Halifax. What is the situation now with communities and the RCMP and these police forces?
well, so I mean, it was mentioned the Mass Casualty Commission. So if people aren't familiar with that, that was in 2020, where a mass shooter who had a long history of domestic violence, not only towards his own partner, but towards sex workers, as is often usual. So a long history of male violence, had assaulted people before, all overlooked by the police. In fact, they initially say in the press conference he wasn't known to police, and then it turned out he had in fact been arrested for violence. So he drove around the province like overnight and murdered, what is it, 14, 21 people? 19 people, yeah. Murdered a bunch of people, and it was a complete police mishandling. Like, not only did they not respond to domestic violence, not only did they not respond to his past violence, he had a police car that he had bought and was painting in his like garage. He wore a police uniform. So, I mean, if you want to get away with killing people dressed like a cop, they had no ability to like shut down his movement. They had no idea where he was going. He managed to drive like across the province at night. They didn't put out an alert, so people were out on the street that would have been inside. So they didn't use the emergency alert system. So all these things happened. So there was a inquiry into that that was supposed to, of course, make all these recommendations around domestic violence, around policing. It will not surprise anybody that none of those recommendations have really been adopted. So yeah, I mean, like, it's the exact same. And of course, the RCMP has gone on to, you know, they murdered, 6 Indigenous people in the first months of this year alone, like within like 2 weeks. We had 2 people die in wellness checks in the last month. So, you know, despite the fact that this is no longer hitting the news in the way it was in 2020, when it became a brief item of interest for people, police deaths are actually up. So the police will talk about deadliest year for police, but every year since has been like the deadliest year for victims of police violence, like both the RCMP and local police forces. So what's happening right now, the RCMP is like, they literally like created a mass murderer, have not really been held accountable, have recommendations, and as usual have done nothing to actually like act on that, and have also like been given tanks and more weaponry.
Wow. So Namux, during the height of the crisis that was happening in your territory, I mean, the Wet'suwet'en shut down this country, right? There were acts of solidarity, not only all over Canada, but really around the world. You know, we seen through various media coverage and in headlines, right? We've seen the violence that was happening on your territory with the RCMP, with the military. Now the pipeline is built. People may assume that things are quiet or that the fight is over. What's happening now on your territory? Are you still being harassed? Are you still being surveilled? What's happening now, and what is coming?
You know what? The height, and I'm glad you brought that up, because the former Prime Minister of this country, Trudeau, was calling my personal number to get a hold of people and make this stop. I said, you know, that's an act of war. Our nation doesn't tell another nation what to do. It's an act of war. I said, that's what you're doing to us. And then do you know that the Attorney General of British Columbia at that time was Eby, who's now the Premier of British Columbia. So he's the one that signed the attack orders on us, the invasion orders, and hundreds. When they had, at that time, called Kurg, now called Crew, when it was sent in, we knew we were the template of what would happen for the rest of Canada. We knew it was going to get extreme. But we had, unfortunately, faith in this country to think that maybe there would be a way to let them know all we want is clean water, clean air, and be who we are. We're Wet'suwet'en. We've never wanted more than what we have. We just want to protect what is there. And with the crisis that is happening throughout this world, we have every right to do that for everybody. Our law says, you know, we're doing it for the betterment of all. It doesn't say just for the Wet'suwet'en. It says for all. And that's what we do. Is it getting any better? Not particularly. They're just warming up for the next step. You got to realize when Trudeau put in the Emergency Measures Act, he threw that one word in there that you all need to be aware of. The word is critical. So now they're going to say that every part of industry, whether it be mining, forestry, or oil and gas, they put that word in there, they have every right to send the CRU after you. You know, now they're actually CRU is CRU British Columbia, CRU Ontario. It was CURG as one unit. Now every province has it. So that tells you what they're getting warmed up for. Yes, the pipeline is built in our territory, but there's never been a pipeline in the world built in lands like we do. We have mountains, and they never built pipelines over mountains like we do. And right now, sure, the pipe's in the ground, but it's not moving much. It is practicing. They actually have to have compressor stations built. There's actually 2 that is needed on our territory alone. And each one of them, they have to clear land the size of about 16 football fields. So we have 2 more man camps that are coming, anywhere from 500 to 2,000 men coming back. And we have a neighboring nation, the Niska, that have the PRGT, Prince Rupert Gas Transmission. And that one is going to be as big as the project that was on ours. And yes, it's in the ground, but it's not successful. There's no market. They're just trying to train people to listen to what they say or else. You don't happen to listen to the or else. You are the or else. That's all you have to do is stand up and say, I'm here, I can't. Don't you see me? Don't you hear me? They're afraid of you doing that. I have no fear of the RCMP. I told them, I said, I'm one of the most surveilled guys in this country, but I'm also part of Canada, so you're here to protect me too. I go up and I shake their hands. They don't like that. And I thank them. I said, you know what? Nobody can attack me because you guys are here to protect a citizen of this country. And I'm also the son of a Second World War veteran. They hate that. And I love doing that.
Wow. Yeah, so you talked about man camps, and I've reported extensively on man camps and the link between man camps and the genocide against our people, the genocide specifically against our women and girls, because violence against the land, lack of consent against the land, you know, equates to the violence that our women and girls are facing. And with the Prince Rupert natural gas pipeline that is probably going to be approved, your neighbors and your allies, the Gitxsan, they have not given their free, prior, and informed consent, and they're gearing up now for a fight. We're going to see this play out over and over and over again. And the question that I'm constantly seeking an answer to in the various coverage that I do in regards to the violence, you know, against our people across the board is like, who holds the RCMP to account? Who holds these people, you know, to account? Who do they answer to? What can be done to actually save lives and to stop the murder of our people and stop the invasion of our territories? So I want to ask all of you, what's been your experience in any attempts to transform or reform the RCMP? Is it possible? Monia, we'll start with you.
I think this is a very good question. When after my husband came back from Syria in 2003, we didn't want to simply turn the page. We wanted to know what happened exactly, and we wanted to hold people accountable for what they did. And immediately after, we asked for a public inquiry, and there was a lot of resistance. So the first answer was no, but then we were somehow, I guess, lucky because at that time everybody was kind of wanted to get rid of Jean Chrétien, and the Paul Martin team pushed for his leadership. And when Paul Martin came, I think he wanted really to show how different he was from his predecessor, and he accepted a public inquiry. So that was, I mean, there is a little sort of an anecdote about it. I don't know, it was mentioned by some journalists. I'm not sure whether it is 100% sure or not, but apparently the RCMP did not like that Paul Martin issued that call for the inquiry. And whether this is a conspiracy or not, they said, we will let you down very quickly. And then it was one of very short-lived government for Paul Martin, because I think in 2006, in the middle of the campaign, the RCMP at that time announced it was, they never intervene during an election. It's very, very rare. And they intervene. And the tide at that time was all of a sudden against Paul Martin. And this is how Stephen Harper came into power. So again, I'm not here fueling any conspiracy, but yes, they are quite powerful. And maybe it does not explain totally why Stephen Harper came, but I know for sure when Stephen Harper came, the country took really a direction. Not that Paul Martin was much better, but it took a direction where the second Anti-Terror Act was passed, Bill 51, that affected many communities, including that was showed at the surface it was against terrorism, but it affected principally the Indigenous community, because they included into the national security, they included the financial sort of security, they included the resources, the national resources. So I think that's a new sort of agenda that allowed the RCMP and the law enforcement in general in this country to have more power. To come back to that public inquiry stayed about 2.5 years. And when Judge O'Connor released his fact-checking report and then his recommendation report, most of the recommendations were not implemented. The only one kind of half implemented was the creation of this umbrella sort of organization that would be where several law enforcement agency will be accountable. So they created that, but it was not even, it was more like a parliamentarian thing, not an independent accountable entity. So it is, I wonder, as much as you asked us in this question, how those power are really go very, very deep in our society. Politicians are the first one to be scared and not, or maybe compliant and not ready to ask for change. But that does not mean that there is nothing we can do about. When my husband was in prison, he was basically in a place where I could never see him back. I mean, when we've seen the picture of the prisoner coming out of the Syrian dungeons recently, like in January, I thought maybe my husband could have been one of them coming out if there was not the public outcry. So I think we need that resistance to be going on, even if it is not successful the first, second, maybe, maybe the first generation, maybe with a community, it goes nowhere. I wouldn't say nowhere, but it's not as successful. But I think this idea that this institution is rotten at its core, it sits at injustice. And there is a principle in my culture that would say everything that is built on wrong is going to be always wrong. So I think this is very important to keep this in mind. I don't think we can easily reform. I don't think we can reform the RCMP. But the fact that we are talking about, the fact that we study about, the fact that we do research, that we create awareness, I think this is part of continuing pointing to the wrongs. And one day, you know, things can be changed, maybe not totally, but we can, you know, we can bring those women together to have a better situation.
Hi. Elle, do you think that the RCMP can be reformed, or are you for complete dismantling? Is there any possibility?
Yeah, so there's a prison lawyer in BC, Michael Jackson, so not the singer, the prison lawyer. And he says that reform is part of the life cycle of an institution. So crisis and reform is part of how a prison, policing, all these institutions extend themselves. So they go into crisis, and then you have to have like an inquiry, and then you have to implement records which don't get implemented, and that gives you 20 more years of lifespan. So this is what reform actually does, is reform that claims to actually address the institution is actually about extending the status quo. I'm going to take us to a rabbit hole that Desmond Cole and I actually fell down, going back to the like mass casualty, like the mass shooting. So I don't know how deep you guys are into this, but the first couple of days, the RCMP had like this different spokesperson, and they brought in like a better spokesperson essentially, because the first spokesperson was terrible. That spokesperson that they brought in, his wife was his ex-wife was the spokesperson during the Robert Pickton stuff in BC. She ended up testifying for the families in their lawsuit against the RCMP, because not only were they sexually harassing her instead of investigating the murders of the woman, they were busy watching porn instead of doing the investigation. So she literally had not only been massively sexually harassed herself, but was saying like, when they were watching videos of the woman, they were commenting sexually on the woman. And she ends up testifying for the families. She divorces this guy. He ends up staying with the RCMP. She is massively traumatized from her experience, gets agoraphobia, can't go outside for like years, leaves the RCMP. Her son ends up dealing drugs and kills his friend and gets convicted of first-degree murder. And she says she believes that's because of the RCMP father, like the trauma that she went through, that she wasn't able to like ever, like her mental health. And then she's like, he was basically trying to kill off his father, who's the RCMP, because of the traumatic experiences he had. And so she's like, I support my son who's in prison for first-degree murder. I say all that. This is a rabbit hole I fell into when I was researching who this spokesperson was. But I think it's so illustrative of the entire violence that is policing. So not only the violence, of course, they do to us, the violence they do to community, the violence that takes place inside their own families, the psychological violence, the sexual violence. 8% of violence against sex workers that's documented is like from policing, right? One of the reasons why national inquiry needed to missing and murdered Indigenous women is the RCMP had done the previous inquiry and were guilty of like harassing and murdering Indigenous women themselves, right? Like, the RCMP, why are they formed? They're formed as a colonial frontier police force to literally remove Indigenous people from lands, which is what they continue to do today. So in the ongoing process of colonization, they're taking kids to residential schools and tracking down runaways. Like, this is what the RCMP is. So how do you reform violence? Like, if somebody's punching you in the face, how do you reform that? You're like, no, stop and go away and like, stop punching me in the face. You're not like, is there a better angle we could come at? You know, so if the police are inherently violent force and they're not a violence that develops on its own, they're a violence that reflects the deep violence of a capitalist, extractive, genocidal state that is Canada. And so the violence that is in the police is an ideology that's part of this country, the foundation of this country, and is part of capitalism. How are you going to reform that? The only thing you can do is, and you said this, like the violence is done to the land. It's done to women. It's done, like, this is an inherent violence. One of the things I'm working on right now is police dogs and like the violence that takes place to nature when you use animals against their consent as weapons. and what that means, and the like deep harm that's actually done to animals in the name of like weaponizing and propaganda that's been used against colonized people for like generations, right? Like setting dogs on kids fleeing residential schools. The vast majority of dog bites in Canada are Black and Indigenous people. So literally weaponizing nature against us, like, which is another form of genocide. So how do you reform that? Like, stop being violent to nature? So no, of course, the only solution obviously is that to rethink what we do instead of policing. But the thing is, policing isn't just an action, it's an ideology. And that's the problem. Aliens could come down tomorrow and vaporize the RCMP, but we would just have a private police force sponsored by the oil companies that we put in place. Because until we believe the idea that, you know, like policing is the ideology that some people belong to this land and some don't. We need to police the borders because some people belong here and should be allowed to be here and others are illegal, right? Some people have property and belong in homes, and some people are frightening homeless people and they need to be policed. Some people should be able to live freely and happily, the vast white majority, and everybody else is the people on the other side of the thin blue line who are the chaotic forces that are control, and so on. And that's an ideology, right, that lives in us too. I don't want to see that homeless person outside Tim Hortons asking me for money. I don't want to see this on the street. Why is there this tent down? Someone should do something about this. Kids are being loud at night. I need to call in a noise complaint, right? Like as long as you have an idea of order and disorder, and some people are inherently disordered, racialized people, Indigenous people, mentally ill people, queer people, sex workers, people who use drugs, you know, people living in poverty, if all of us are disordered, there will always be some force called into place to control us. And whether that's the RCMP, whether that's local police, provincial police, or whether it's like the Irving Oil happy family values like force or crew, like the Paw Patrol crew or whatever they're going to call it, it's still going to be the same thing. Because until we don't want until we cease to be scared of people who have mental health issues, until we stop thinking of like many people, unhoused people as unhuman, until we stop having a society based on haves and have-not, which includes race, citizenship, etc., there will always be something in place. So how do we reform that? So it has to start, I mean, it's a whole, it's not just the police. The police are the symptom, but they're not the cause.
Thank you. Yeah. So Canada, you know, as a state, and from the beginning, they have backed the RCMP and these systems, and they are complacent in all of this violence. What role does the state have in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, the state, and you've talked about this, the state is inherently violent. Like the process of forming a nation, you see it obviously in like firsthand a country like Canada, where we have active colonization, right? Like Canada as a nation does not exist across Indigenous nations that like actually exist. Like Canada is a fiction imposed on top of Indigenous nations, right? That is always going to be a violent act. A border is inherently violent. When you say like capital can cross this border, Walmart can cross this border, a corporation can cross this border, but people can't. That is inherently violent. When you say, again, like some people have property and that needs to be protected, like the very notion of private property, which is what summons policing, right? I need someone to protect my home. So these things are all embedded in the state. So yeah, like the state is violent in itself, and it gives birth to all forms of violence. So when people are like, oh, we want to address bullying, well, then you have to address like the violent state. We live under violence and domination. Bell Hooks said it the best, right? Like when you live in a society that's based on values of domination, you will fail your own values over and over again, right? Like, and that is the case, that we are so swimming in violence so we don't even recognize the normalized violence that is everyday life of the state, right? And so we only see it when it outbursts, when we're like, oh, someone put a knee on a neck. Oh, somebody got killed. Oh, somebody pulled out a taser. Oh, you know, this act of violence happened, and it becomes visible, but it's not, it's always there. Like the whole notion of how we're surveyed, how we're controlled, like how a city is built, like urban planning is violent and anti-Black. Ted Rutland talks about this. Cities themselves like are anti-Indigenous, like in the way they're set up, like as outposts, like they start, you know, so like as you trace things, there's no way to separate out like anti-Indigenous violence, colonization, militarism, like citizen, you know, like all of this is the same thing. So I'll stop talking, but.
Yeah. And Monia or Namux, did you want to add?
Well, I was thinking as you're speaking, like you're so on the money, but one of the issues we have is we got politicians with the spine of a jellyfish. Do you know that the RCMP pension fund is tied to the oil and gas industry? Like, what's wrong with this picture when they're supposed to protect you? Meanwhile, they're standing up for their pension fund. And they have one of the strongest unions in Canada. I can use an example of one of our guys beat to death by 5 RCMP members. Not one of them was charged. And the judge said, you know what? They've already went through enough trauma with this man's death. Well, what about us, the family, that lost a son, a brother, an uncle, a cousin? And yet they went through trauma by beating them to death. And that was their excuse, and they got away with it. And when we think about change, a number of years ago when the defund the RCMP was happening, what are we going to have if we don't have the police? That doesn't mean they're the only answer. I often wonder, why are they called royal? That should be something to think about. I went to Buckingham Palace to address this. I want to know, why would something that is there to murder people, kill the planet, assist industry to help destroy everything we've lived on for centuries, have the name royal in it? It didn't make sense to me. It still doesn't to this day. Is that what it takes to be an officer that is supposed to protect and serve? They're protecting industry and serving industry, but what about the people? What is the answer of how to fix it? That's an internal issue, because if I also went to Regina. It's the biggest training institute of Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and it was to start at the very training center. It lasted a couple of months, and they went right back to their same old pattern. Oh, it's not working. Well, how is it not going to work in a couple of months? You said it yourself, it all takes time. If you win a little bit each time as you're moving forward, you're making a difference for the future. I don't ever want the touchdown. If I throw for a touchdown, look at what I'm missing in between. I want that yardage. And that yardage means you dot the I's and cross the T's, and you hold people accountable. If you can't hold them accountable, why are they there? I'm a chief. I'm accountable. I have to be. How come they aren't? I'm a human being. I'm accountable. How come they're not? It's always questions. What is the answer? The answer is you start at the very basis of it. You go to the very core of it, and you make them accountable. Because if they can get a retirement fund that depends on destroying this planet, nobody's being accountable.
Monia, did you?
Accountability is very interesting, and it's an ideal. I'm not sure in the case of the RCMP there was any sort of accountability. Everybody who participated in the O Canada division, O Canada project, this is the project that basically was key in deporting or rendering my husband to Syria and other Canadian as well. So this is a project that was immediately put in place after 9/11. They appointed RCMP officers to surveil the Muslim community, to raid houses, to gather information, and most importantly, to bring charges, which they were never able to do. And those people who participated into this complicit rendition, so working with the US, working with the Syrian, working with the Jordanian to torture Canadian citizens, all of them, they got promoted later on. So I don't think there is any sort of accountability. I will come back to this point of, actually, I would like to mention another case, very interesting, about how the RCMP played the role in demonization of the Muslim, but not only demonization, in criminalizing Muslim as well in this country. It happened in British Columbia. There were 2 converts. So those 2 people, a man and his wife, or his common law wife, and they had, especially the man, he had a long history of criminal activity before what happened to him. And so the police knew him. However, they used this long historical criminal activity plus mental health and addiction in order to entrap him once he became, and his partner, they became Muslim. And they created this case out of almost nowhere. So John Nuttall and Amanda Cordery, this is a case, I'm not sure if a lot of Canadians know about it, but it's a very, very important case. There is a podcast, I think it's called Under Pressure or Cooker or something like this, that was produced, I think, in collaboration with the CBC. And it tells all the story of this couple, how they were approached by informant, and how there was, I think, $1 million paid in part-time hours to the RCMP officer to just entrap these two men, this couple, these two individuals, and use their mental health. And this is the only case in Northern America, I'm saying in Northern America, even in the US, it didn't happen, where a judge was able to say that this is an entrapment, because the RCMP and CSIS and the FBI, also in the counterpart in the US, has been working so hard to entrap member of the Muslim community, using especially the most vulnerable ones. So sometimes addiction, mental health, a lot of it mental health, and they will send informant, and they will try to make them do things and say things, and then they will portray this as, see, we are keeping this country safe, while they are creating themselves these kind of criminals. So entrapment, this is the only case, and it has been, I think, Human Rights Watch in the United States, they investigated the FBI, most of the 80 or even 90% of the cases of terrorism that happened in the United States, they were based on entrapment. In Canada, I don't think the journalists do a very good job, because, you know, nobody really investigated to show that there was an entrapment. Something I am quite sure is that most of the cases that were brought as cases of terrorism, there was informants, member of the community, or sometimes outside of the community, who would play detrimental role. So I think, to speak about here, you know, accountability, if we say there is only one case where the judge was brave enough and smart enough and probably independent enough to say that this is an entrapment, whereas there must be many other possibilities, well, yeah, I am a little bit here discouraged and skeptical about it. Does not mean that we cannot keep you know, being vocal, denouncing, and hoping that some journalists will bring those stories and will bring those real facts to us.
Wow. So how can people protect themselves? This question is for all of you. How do we protect ourselves, and where do you see the role of non-police actors? So Indigenous nations, community members, leaders, even institutions, organizations, grassroots groups, municipalities, all of these things, to protect themselves from this violence, from this powerful, colonial, murderous institution. How do we protect?
I think I'll start off with the very fact is, don't be afraid. We were told when we were young, you should be afraid of nothing if you're telling the truth. And if all they got is just fear and violence to use against you, you've already won. All you have to do is stand up. It's not that hard to tell the truth. They live a lie. How many times have we heard them come up to us and say, I'm sorry? My thought is, are they sorry they did something, or are they sorry they got caught? It's that simple, right? So they actually want us afraid, then we fall in line and do as we're told. I know as Wet'suwet'en, they've come through our doors with axes and power saws. They burned down our homes. They've shot at us. We have to deal with the attack dogs. We have to deal with the snipers. And they think somehow that's going to intimidate us. I look at it in the same way that the elders told us, this is home. You look after your home. They get to go home. We are home. They get to leave. They get to make a mess. Industry does the same thing. How do we keep them from taking this so-called power and use it against us? It's because we give it to them by allowing them to give us fear, by allowing them to make us afraid for our children to go out the door. You just stand up and you say no. You tell them, you're an asshole. I know what an asshole looks like, and you smell like one too.
How do we protect ourselves, Al?
I'm going to turn to Palestine for a moment because I learned a lot in Palestine about organizing against extreme violence. So when we were in Hebron, I don't know if anyone's seen The Settlers, Louis Theroux, you get Issa Amro, who we were meeting in Hebron, is in that documentary, and you get a kind of redux of what it was like. So we were stopped about 8 times by police malicious checkpoints within about 800 meters walking through Hebron. We had guns pulled on us by militias, like, etc. And like we were just told. So Omar from the group that was showing us around, he's just, you know, they're speaking to him, he's speaking back to them, and he would just like, follow me. And we're just like walking in his footsteps. And then we went up to Issa Amro's house, which is surrounded by armed settlers. Like take pot shots at him, they invade his home and burn down his stuff. Like, but they say in Palestine, when they say existence is resistance, they mean that. Like we sometimes mean like, oh, my existence is resistance, I'm taking a selfie. They mean like, I am living surrounded by armed settlers and they're not pushing me off my land. So what do? They take back homes, smuggle in concrete, and set 24-hour patrols of people from the community to protect the homes so that they can live. They have international delegations they organize so the children can walk to school. They work with Israeli Jewish people to walk the children to school. Like they are constantly, because community is the antidote to policing, right? That we are vulnerable to policing because we are fractured and because we call the cops on our neighbors rather than actually be able to deal with it, right? And so when you see successful resistance, it's when you have a community that's organized, that's unified, that's courageous, and that's unafraid and willing to push back. Another story Omar told, and I guess I'll say after this one, is he had a friend that was driving in Bethlehem, got stopped at a checkpoint. It was a like deluge, like raining hard, and the cops said, like the military said, IDF said, you got to get out. We have to search everybody. And he's like, but my mother's in the car, like my children are in the car. It's raining. Like if you get out, like I can't get them out of the car. And they're like, I'm just doing my job. Like you need to get out of the car. And they argued back and forth with him. So finally he went to the car and he said in English, you're going to have to get out of the car. This is a good man. He's just doing his job. And the soldier said, but you're Palestinian. You speak Arabic. Why are you talking to your family in English? And he said, I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to you. And I'm going to remind you of what you told me, that you wouldn't hurt us. And so that's dignity, right? In that moment, he did not buckle. He did. So this is what Palestinians talk about, is like, when you are under humiliation, when you're under constant violence, when you are made powerless by the state, you are not powerless. So they will ask things like, what is your name? Where are you from? Oh, David, that's not, you know, like they literally do anything they can when they're going through checkpoints to humanize, to speak, to refuse to be bowed down. And so we learn from that it's not just, like pushing back. It's also like our refusal to fall into the trap of like seeing ourselves as powerless, our refusal to be humiliated, our refusal to accept their force upon us. And if we enact that constantly with each other, so when the police are coming to the door, are we there protecting people? Are we patrolling our own communities? Are we doing what in the place of what the police say they do and we know they don't do? So who's protecting our women? Who's walking the streets to make sure that people have food and are safe? Like when we do that, we remove the need for police. So those are our most important pieces: building our community, knowing each other, not being afraid of each other, learning how to negotiate conflict and harm with ourselves, speaking within our families and communities and buildings wherever we live to learn how to solve conflict differently. And those are the tools that actually move us away from policing and move us into something else.
Hi. Monia?
A lot of the communities who are, I think, targeted mainly by the RCMP, by the police, our community who are, and here I'm speaking, for example, about the immigrant communities. They came to this country because they have been persecuted by the police in their own countries. So they have a long history of fearing the police, of not really knowing how to. They don't want to deal with the police. So there is also a lot. On the other side, the RCMP knows that. So they use those fear tactics in order to intimidate these people. And after 9/11, there were many visits by CSIS and the RCMP at the workplace. So imagine you are in your workplace and you have a visit from CSIS coming to you, and your employer would know about it. Or at home, sometimes for international students who are staying with friends or family, then they will have those visits. Very intimidating, very scary for the family. So they use these tactics against those community, and a lot of these community, they would fall into the trap because of lack of knowledge, because of fear that, oh, I have nothing to hide, so I will just sit down and tell them everything. This is actually the worst thing you can do, because they will take everything you say against you later on, and they will turn it against you. So I think there is a lot of misunderstanding. Again, I will come back to this image that we have of this nice Mountie coming, and then the child, the CN Tower hugging those Mounties, or, the touristic aspect of Canada being built around this image of nice police officers. And a lot of people do not understand that those, not necessarily the same people, but it's the same institution that is also going to one day maybe deport them, or one day are going to be the reason for them to be kicked out of their workplace, or, to be arrested for at the airport. So I think it's a lot of it. It's ignorance. It's also trauma coming from another country, from another culture, but also it's this sort of lack of knowledge. So I think it is very important that we, as maybe people who have privilege to have this knowledge, is to bring this awareness to people around us about, if there is those encounters, interview, whatsoever, you are not supposed to go and see those, the police, unless they have something real against you. Unfortunately, and this is really something, again, I'll bring it home. When my husband did that, when my husband did his own right to say, I am not meeting with the RCMP, and I would rather go with a lawyer, and his lawyer contacted the RCMP to say that, yes, my client is ready to meet you anytime, then this is where they said, no, we don't want to meet with you. And then they would go behind the scene and basically share information with the American and stop you in another place. So I think, yes, this is, again, a violent, powerful institution that maybe it is true we should not be scared of denouncing the wrongs and the intimidation, but also I think we have to be working together, because if they will arrest one of yours, if they will charge one of ours, I think we have to be ready to move on to, another level of fight, another level of resistance. So it is easy to say that, yes, we can, educate ourselves, educate our families, our communities, but it also requires a lot of resistance, a lot of work to face this violence, because it can be very difficult to do it alone.
I just wanted to say something quickly too, is I think we also have to get used to an idea of justice that isn't going to be accountability. Like, there is never accountability. We're living in a time where we're already seeing, we were just talking about this, right? So many people, of course, that were promoted genocide, attacked everybody else who was talking about it, and now running away and turning, wait, no, yeah, they should let in humanitarian aid. So we're in like, those people are never going to be held accountable. They're never going to be shamed. They're never going to face any, whatever we imagine as justice is. So I think we also have to understand that, like, justice has to exist without accountability and without vindication. We have to find it for ourselves, because I think we always imagine the day will come and then all the people that have wronged us will have to stand up and it doesn't work that way. They, as you said, they get promoted, they get away with it, they get celebrations at their deaths, and we die anonymously, right? You know what I mean? So our idea of justice can't be that. It has to be something else, something more transformative than that, that doesn't like depend upon us getting that recognition of somebody realizing they were wrong, because they never will.
I'm glad she mentioned promotion. Do you know that your police chief in this city, the largest city in Canada, was a Gold Star commander in the raids on us and the invasions on us in 2019 and 2020? His reward is that he is now your police chief here. They get rewarded. I say that because if you think about KKR, General David Petraeus, so he was the lead general, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Iran. Then he became the head of the CIA in the United States. Well, he runs for KKR, their security department. So a number of the people that he trained are now either Gold Star commanders or police chiefs in Canada. So that's a template we talked about. They took his war manual, and that's what they follow in Canada. And I said we were the template. Well, all we had to do was survive it. We have areas in our territory. We have moose, we have bear, we have fish, we go hunting, fishing. That's what we have in our freezers. But we have parts of our territory where we don't hunt, because if we carry a gun, we're armed and dangerous, and they have every right to shoot us. And they get promotions like being a police chief in the largest city in Canada. And yet we're criminalized. Accountability. That's their version of accountability, of these great promotions. They're set for life. We have pictures of snipers smiling as they're aiming their guns at us. They're having the time of their life. There's something psychologically wrong in their training. When CURG, which is now Crew, first started, you had to volunteer for it. They didn't go out there, you, and you, you're part of this unit. They had to volunteer. They got the highest wages. And not only that, where they come from, it doesn't matter if they come from Toronto or Nova Scotia, their unit, where they come from, has to pay another person to take their place. Meanwhile, that doubled the wages. The very first time that CURG, now Crew, was out, they had a $100 million budget. And then next thing we heard was 43 million, and then 49 million. Now it's unlimited. They don't even have to report to us what they spent on us. About 3 years ago, one dirt road on our territory, they spent $10 million just driving up and down it. Just driving up and down it, watching us. There was not one incident ever. We train our people well to make sure that they are not violent. We are the highest ranking chiefs. I'm a high ranking war chief. The last thing I want is violence. I know that because they'll get hurt, and so will our people. And they infiltrate us. They send people in to instigate violence. And again, we're targeted. But you got to be smart enough. Number one, never wallow in the mud with pigs. But also think above and know their strategy. Their strategy is pretty simple. It's violence, and that's all they know, and that's all they're trained for. That's what they give up their lives and get trained to do for the rest of their lives. Realize how dirty it can get. Be human. Have that the dignity and pride that you have in your nation, to know that people will stand together, and that these ones that come in to hurt us, to kill us, threaten our children, murder our women. Our beautiful highway through our territory is called the Highway of Tears. And yet these people that are supposed to serve and protect are not doing it. They're part of the problem. You just rise above that. Because if we all got into the mindset of just hatred and revenge, we're not human. Because there is no humanity in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think we're going to wrap it up pretty quickly here. I also wanted to add that, you know, as a journalist who's been covering these types of stories for many, many years, I can attest to being personally harassed and surveilled and having dealt with corruption from the RCMP having feared for my life from the RCMP on more than one occasion. Even another example of blatant lies and corruption within their system against a journalist a few years ago while covering the raids in Fairy Creek on Vancouver Island. I had various interactions with the RCMP, and thank God during all those interactions, I knew that I had to document each and every interaction that I had with the police. A couple of weeks after one of my times on the ground covering Fairy Creek, I received a notice from a lawyer that was working for the outlet that I had been on assignment for, with an affidavit from an officer who was filing this affidavit against me in court. And the media had been taking the RCMP to court because the RCMP was impeding us with their injunctions from being able to cover their actions. And this affidavit, this RCMP officer signed and swore that I had lied to her about the job that I was doing, what I was doing, and where I was going. Meanwhile, I had the video of our whole interaction, which rebutted everything. I submitted it to my lawyer. We you know, did an affidavit. The judge like totally dismissed it. They didn't face any consequences for lying and signing, but these are the lengths that they will go through. Like, they could have ended my career, and they could have ended my career. It was the police that arrested me when I was arrested, not the RCMP, but they are all linked. The RCMP is the daddy of them all, and they all work together. But, you know, that, you know, the work that we do is the public's right to know. And I can attest to that deeply, deeply embedded corruption and the harassment that not only your people are facing, and many marginalized people in this country are facing. So thank you, everybody, for coming to the panel. Thank you, amazing, incredible guests, for all of your information. Hi.